Welcome everybody to Cybersecurity in the 2020 election part 1. This is part 1 of maybe at least part 2 and probably part 3 before we are done with all of this, because this is kind of a big topic. I'm going to let Charlie explain all that to you, but my job is to do kind of the nitty-gritty details. So here's the nitty-gritty details. If you can't see how to mute or unmute yourself or fix your camera, please wiggle your mouse at the top or at the bottom of your screen. Mine is at the top when I'm screen sharing, so it kind of moves around. If you have any issues, feel free to use the chat button on that ribbon that comes across your screen and send us a message. If that doesn't work, you can always email me at amynichols@areaagencyonageing.org. I leave my email up on my other screen in case there are any issues. If we are Zoom bombed or Zoom hacked, you'll know it right away because you'll get lots of crazy flashing lights and probably some obscenities that come across there. If that happens, I will end this meeting right away for all of us and we will pick it up again on another day. We are recording today's session, so if you don't want to be recorded, please turn off your camera if it's not a good hair day. I unfortunately am not having a great hair day, but I still have to leave the camera on. So you have the choice and you don't have to. And let's talk about us a little bit. I'm Amy Nichols. I'm the campus coordinator for the Campus for Creative Aging located in St. Joe, Michigan. I say this because we usually have some out of state and out of the country people joining us on our Zooms. So we're kind of a worldwide thing. It's fun. We are located in St. Joe at 2920 Lakeview Drive. We are a physical presence and a movement. Our movement is to make aging creative and fun and educational. And this is why you're here today. Now, we are on Twitter at the Campus for Creative Aging. We are on Facebook at the Campus for Creative Aging. And we have our own website, campusforcreativeaging.org. I think you see the pattern there. I'm proud to introduce our instructor today is Charlie Olszewski, an engineer and educator with more than 20 years in higher ed and in the private sector. Charlie is one of the smartest people I know, and he knows a lot about this. So it's going to be very fun for me to get to sit back and watch and just kind of run a few things for you. So with that, I'm going to mute myself, Charlie, and I'm going to stop sharing my screen, and I am going to let you get started on your merry way. Welcome.
Okay. Thank you, Amy. And let me pop up on my screen for you. Start our presentation. So yes, like Amy said, I was in higher education for over 20 years. I was in private sector also for over 20 years. I retired several years ago. Currently, I just do seminars like this, which I really enjoy. I don't know about being the smartest person that Amy knows, but certainly it does give me an opportunity to learn a whole lot of stuff on my own, and then I enjoy sharing it with other people. So that's what I basically do pretty much in today's world. This is a little bit new. As Amy said, we're doing these Zoom sessions. So I have done a number of scam and cybersecurity sessions in person at libraries, at Senior Center, at the CCA. This is the first time I'm doing one that is on Zoom. I've been using Zoom for Friends, so we do a lot of happy hour Zooming, but this is fine, first time doing this. So I suspect that I will learn a lot from this, and hopefully we'll be able to improve it as we go ahead. I have the note in the packet that Amy sent to you, the handout that was sent to you about the Zoom bombing. It does happen, not often. Amy and I have talked about it, and they've not been bombed yet. We hope that that continues, and I'm optimistic that probably we won't have a problem with it. So the handout that you've got is what I call a version 0 handout. In fact, I think it says on it it's nearly complete. Basically, I get that together as quickly as I can to get it off to Amy. I used to get it together a day or two in advance so people can print them. I don't have to get it together quite as quickly anymore, but still like to get it to them earlier, and then I continue working on it and add other stuff. I also hope that there will be questions involved in today's session about things that I never even thought of that I might add some more stuff to. When that happens, then I will send out another version. I'll send it to Amy and she'll send it out to all of you That'll be the non-zero version. That'll be the more completed version. I'm also today looking for feedback, and I'll talk about that more at the end. We do have a date reserved for part 2 to this, and I'm sure there's just tons of stuff that I can talk about, so I'm quite sure that we will have a part 2. We may have a part 3 if there are enough questions and enough interest. Then Amy and I have talked and we can add that. So I'll ask more about that later. Right now, we have a polling question that I think Amy can bring up and we can do. I think I have to stop sharing to do that.
Unmute myself so I can tell you this. Polls are our way of kind of gauging what you know or what's happening out there. And so this is how secure is mail-in voting? 1, not at all. 2, 3 is kind of. 4 is, and 5 is very secure. And you guys have already figured out how to vote. All you do is click on whichever number you most wholeheartedly agree with, even maybe not wholeheartedly, and hit enter. And as soon as everyone has voted, I will share the results so everybody can see these. If you've not used polls, these are kind of a fun way in Zoom to get your message across. And as a teacher, it makes sure you're all paying attention. So you can't nod off on this class. And it is a group. You must do this as a paid for account. You don't get this as a free Zoom account. So don't think you're going to go poll your family. Sorry. All right, Charlie, it looks like most of our people have voted. I'm going to end it and I'm going to share these results. So it looks like your crowd thinks that 4, about 4 out of 5 is the biggest one, but you have kind of votes all over the place.
Yes, and I'm not surprised by that. And in fact, I am pleasantly surprised that it's that many people who voted a 4 and a 5. That's a good thing. Okay, so I guess we'll come back to me and close down the poll and go back to our sharing.
There we go.
Yep, there we go. So good news, it sounds like most people think it is pretty secure. And as I talk about this and go through this, I think you'll find out that so far to date, we've not really had any problems with fraud. We've not had any problems with the polling. So we'll get into that in a little bit more detail. So in light of the recent political issues, so this is the little blurb about the seminar that you signed up for. So today, as I indicated, we're going to focus really on the mail-in ballot history and mail-in ballots. There's a lot more to this. The fake news, the disinformation, the social media, the foreign interference, all that stuff I think is very important and we need to talk about that. I'm thinking that's what we'll talk about in the second session in about 3 weeks from now, but your feedback will certainly guide me on that. First off though, let's talk a little bit, and there is about 2 or 3 pages of material in your handout dealing with voting in Michigan. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on that, but I do want you to know, really, really important in this era of disinformation and fake news, this is the website. This is the website that you want to go to if you're looking for the correct information about the state of Michigan voting. It's got a ton of information in there. So the other thing is, I want to do poll number 2 before we go on any further and see what you think there. So I'll stop.
Okay, don't stop sharing, Charlie. Let me try and see if it pops up for us, okay? Because I think with you, it's co-host. I think I can share with it. Let's find out.
That would be good.
So poll number 2.
Yes.
Y'all see it? Yay, all right. If you mail in your ballot, how much time should you allow to ensure it will be received in time? 1 to 2 days, 3 to 4, 5 to 6, or at least 7 days? All right, I'm going to stop in about 2 seconds here. All right, here's the end of your poll, and it looks like, Charlie, Most of your
Great job.
folks say at least 7 days.
Great job. That's really good, as you will see here in a moment. So in the handout that I sent that you got earlier this morning, as I said in big bold letters there, if you have an absentee ballot in your hand right now, please don't mail that in, because the chances of it getting in time are not 100%. So that's a good thing. It has to be received by the clerk's office by 8 p.m. Tuesday, August 4th. Now, the problem with polling, and Stacy, at least for Lincoln Charter Township, can let you know what time the mail is delivered. I suspect it's delivered well before 8 p.m. in the evening. So that means that it would have to get to them when the mail is delivered to their office. And the same thing for the other clerk's offices. Whenever the mail is delivered, post office doesn't wait till 8 o'clock to make sure they've accumulated all the mail and deliver it. So that's one of the problems. The other thing that's really important about the Michigan information that I gave you is you can track your absent ballot. So you can go onto the website, and I gave you the website there and the directions of how to get to that. And then I think in your handout, I have a screen capture that showed the results that you would get. This is a person who had applied for an absent ballot and then also received the absent ballot. So it shows the date the absent ballot was sent. So all that stuff is there. It's really cool in the state of Michigan. I'm not sure how many other states do that, but it's really neat stuff. So as I said, and as Amy alluded to, there's a lot to know about this stuff, and that's what I really enjoy, is spending a lot of time myself learning it. And if I'm going to learn it, I figure I may as well share it with other people. But as I went through and put together a whole bunch of stuff, read a whole bunch of material, and tried to organize it to present it, a couple big things jumped out to me. One is that the 2020, and I think probably no shock to any of you folks by the looks of things, we will be the subject of interference. The Russian government, other governments, people will try to interfere with our election. So that's become real clear from all the reading I've done. It's likely this will be another close election as well. So we've had a couple of close elections lately. We've had a couple of them that were decided by the Electoral College, not by the popular vote. I have no reason to believe that that's going to change at this point. So I think it's going to be close. Unfortunately, as I've read a lot of materials, I look at our presidential election, not the primary election coming up this week, but the presidential election, the general election in November. I believe that it probably will not, we probably after 2 days will not know who won that election. I have a feeling that this may take 2 to 4 weeks before we have an answer on that. Some of the stuff that I've read, one person in fact said that it's likely that come Christmas Day, we'll still be trying to figure out who's the president of the United States and who won that election. I don't think it'll go that long, but I really think that mentally I'm preparing myself that we won't have results for 2 to 4 weeks. The other thing is the reminder that as I talk to other people and I read stuff and I see people making comments in papers and that, the people in the US and our form of government, the people do not elect the president. The person who wins the popular vote does not necessarily become the president. It's the Electoral College who elects the president. So those are a couple of overriding things that I got out of this. Part A, what I want to do is talk about a broad picture of this whole thing. So I'm going to go through this fairly quickly. Part A, I want to deal with election influence and interference. Talk about the methods, the forms, the techniques. A lot of this will be dealt with later. I think that I'm guessing that I will be picking up on more of this stuff in part 2. Again, based on your input, that'll help guide me too. So the big picture of this thing is sometimes we look at cyber and non-cyber interferences. There are different ways that things are interfered. For the mail-in balloting that we want to focus on today, there probably is no cyber interference on that. The cyber interference comes from our computer connections, our network connections. Mail-in ballots are pieces of paper that go through the US mail. So not much in the way of cyber interference, though I will talk about it probably in part 2 certainly the database, the voter database, can be attacked from a cyber attack, and that could really cause problems if the voter database is messed up, because that's the first step in the process, whether you're doing a mail-in ballot or you're doing an in-person ballot. You first off have to be a registered voter. So how can the elections, and let me just point out something here. You'll notice that I think starts on this thing. Well, actually two things. One thing I forgot to point out, when I do my in-class, in-person presentations, up in the right-hand corner of my PowerPoint, that points to the page number of the handout that was given so that you can follow along on the handout. On the handout, sometimes there's stuff that I don't have in my PowerPoint. And then in my PowerPoint, often I have added more stuff. Almost every, I guess I could say every presentation I've done, I add more stuff. So the way I indicate that to you is anything read on the following pages is not on your handout. If you want to add that real quickly, you're welcome to do that. Those are the things that as I create the next handout, those will actually be added into your session, so you will pick those up at some point. So, influence. Certainly that's the first part of this thing, right? Everybody is influenced. We all want to be influenced. We're all trying to figure out who to vote for. And in order to figure out who to vote for, we need to be influenced. Somebody needs to provide us information. We need to get information from different ways. So we get that information from ads on radios, we get it from TV, we get it from social media, we get it from rallies. We go to different campaign rallies. We get it from our circle of friends, from our family associations, so on and so forth. Political parties, the Democratic Party, the Republican Party send us mailings. Personal conversations, and that's an interesting one. I think that's probably the best way to influence. We tend to get overwhelmed by the TV ads and the radio ads. The TV ads and radio ads have to conform to a time slot, so they can't give all the information that you might want. Those personal conversations, I think, are really important. Those are the times where you can have information that you've heard, clarify that, and clarify why people are believing what they are in order to be influenced. So being influenced is not a bad thing. I think being influenced in how we vote is a good thing. I think that's what we all want. So the information is gathered through the above methods and techniques to make a decision. That's why we are being influenced. We are trying to make a decision. Now, there's another aspect of this influence that's maybe a little bit different, and that is that these other things that affect the election too, the challenges to the results. And I think we've had that. We went through that with the Gore challenge for the hanging chads. I have a feeling this year we likely will have more challenges to the election, and that's why I might delay our results as well. So those will tend to slow the results, and it's one of the reasons I think there will be a delay. Those influences on our election, like I say, they're not, the good influence is helping us making a decision, right? This type of an influence doesn't help us make a decision. In fact, it tends to perhaps taint our belief system about our elections in the US and could cause us some bad feelings about it. So it's sort of a negative influence in this whole thing too. Another thing that influences the elections is the difficulty in voting. If people have a difficult time voting, being able to vote, that also influences the election outcomes, because we believe in the US that everybody should have a right to vote. So, Amy, how about another poll? I think we have a third question
I would
here.
love to. And right before I launch this, though, just a reminder, we are being recorded. I had a few people kind of join us at the end. So if you do not want your face on camera, please leave your camera off. And to use the chat box with questions. I have several questions kind of lining up for you, Charlie. One of them was about one of your polls. Would you like me to read that to you now or come back to that one?
Why don't we take that now? I think we've got time.
Okay, great. So the question was that you were talking about the answer 4 or 5 on the security of mail-in ballots. Mm-hmm. And but they want to know what you think. Do you feel like it's a 4 or a 5 or a 3? What's your opinion on how safe mail-in ballots are?
I do. I believe, and we'll see as we go through this, I believe that they're quite safe. I think, and you'll see, and I'll talk a little bit more about this as we go, there are some issues with the fraud. I think we don't understand it well enough yet. So we'll come back to that and we'll go into some detail on that. But thanks,
Okay.
Amy.
Great. All right. So here is our next poll. And again, you just pick your number and hit enter. And our poll is this: how likely is it that someone, group, can create many fake mail-in ballots casting votes for their candidate? So how likely is it you think a big group could create some fakes and mail them in? 1, not at all, to 5, it will happen. And I'll give you just a couple more seconds to get your votes in.
Yeah, I think there's 13. I think that includes you and I. So
right. So when we get to 10, I figure we're getting close. All right, couple more seconds. All righty, I'm going to end this poll right now. And right now, it looks like the not at alls have it, but there are some skeptics out there.
Yep.
And some people that think it will happen. Yeah.
It's good to be skeptical on that. The majority certainly does look like, and let me just jump in on that too, since I already had the question. I don't think it's high probability that people will be able to generate a whole bunch of fake ballots and have those count. So I'm probably at that 1 or 2 level myself. I don't think I'm up to 3, but I'm at 1 or 2 as well. So anticipating that question that might come. So let's move on to the next page, next slide. Interference influences elections too. This is the bad part of it, right? So we have influence. Everybody wants to be influenced because we're all trying to make a decision, but interference is something different. So interference is stuff that's not legitimate. So this is stuff from a technical standpoint, stuff like destroying data. So here there is the possibility somebody or something could cause ballots to be the mailed-in ballots to be damaged. If there was a municipality that did not have a secure site, waterproof, fireproof vault to store those ballots in, they could all be destroyed before they're actually counted. I don't think anybody in Michigan will be experiencing that problem, but that is a possibility. Databases could be altered. Systems could be shut down. So those types of things. Another way that is an interference with, that's a harmful thing to the influencing, is preventing mail-in voting. So I don't know, somebody could have determined that the mail truck is going to the St. Joe municipal office with a bunch of mail-in ballots and they hijack the mail truck. This could get pretty weird, but there are possible ways that might happen. There have been instances where people were scared from voting, both in person and preventing them from accessing polls, or just creating so much fear that people don't want to go to polls. Violence, we have and especially in other countries in the world where there's a lot of violence that prevents people from actually going to the polls and voting. So shutting down polling stations, fraud, this is a crime, and I really added that. I put fraud in yours, but fraud is a crime that we may talk about later. Some of those typical things that we call fraud are if you vote in 2 different precincts. So I can vote in Lincoln Township where I am, but I can't vote in St. Joe or St. Joe Township. If I do that, that's fraud, that's a crime. If I submit a ballot, if I find out that, say my brother died, and I know he died a couple of weeks ago, and I fill out a ballot and somehow manage to be able to get that through and submit a ballot that looks like it's for my brother, and it votes for the person I want to vote for, that again would be fraud. So there are some legal ramifications to this. Also interference, and let me clarify that here a little bit, false, inaccurate information, stuff we call fake news, stuff we call disinformation. That's done by political parties, our domestic group. It is possible for the Republican Party, the Democratic Party, the Green Party to actually do fake news or disinformation. It's not, I think most of us associate that with foreign governments, but it can also be associated with our local parties. Certainly we've heard a lot about the fact that foreign governments are very much interested in this. The word disinformation has been around for a long time, and that was what the Russian governments did in the Balkans. They started disinformation campaigns that went back years and years ago to disrupt their forms of government. So that's been around. Voter suppression is the one that we're talking about again now. So that would be another type of interference. Again, these are not legitimate influencers. These, in fact, are the bad. How do we decide who to vote for or what proposals to support and all that stuff? Good thing to do from the influence of our friends, the reading, based on, but it is also based on interference. It is also based on the bad stuff as well. So don't lose track of the fact that there could be bad things that are in there. Is all information good or bad? Yeah, the topic of a big discussion for the next one. Disinformation, inaccurate information, manipulated audios and videos that we've got. The issue becomes, how do you know if it's accurate, real, or if it is disinformation? And that will be in part 2. Mail-in ballots, that's what we want to get to, is the mail-in ballots. Can they be manipulated? That, of course, is our question. Could they be used to alter the results of the 2020 general election? What is the history of it? That's what I want to look at. So I want to start off by talking about why would we permit or have mail-in balloting, and then do we have any states that have any experiences with that? And we do have actually several states that have experience with mail-in voting, and it's been going on for some time. And then talk about, is it secure? Is it feasible? Are there problems? And then the history of that. And then finally, want to end on what needs to be done and some final observations that I have. So again, like I said, likely we'll have a close election, likely that it won't be determined in 2 days, likely, and understand that the Electoral College is the one that really counts. So mail-in ballots, why would we do mail-in ballots? Well, there's, I think, 2 different schools of this. One is, and why would we be for or against mail-in ballots, I think is a better way to say that. And one is to look at it from the perspective of, will a particular party be advantaged or disadvantaged by having mail-in ballots? And there is a lot of discussion, a lot of stuff going on with that. Nate Silver, 538.com, found in a study that he did recently, looking back over data from many years of elections, that he could not tell that there was a significant difference either for the Dems or the Republicans by absentee voting. New York Times recently, I think it was last week, they started to see an uptick in Democrats requesting more mail-in ballots than Republicans, so the belief there might be it might favor Democrats. Just this morning, CBS Today indicated that Florida seniors, the older folks, if you will, have a very high rate of vote by mail mailing. And with Trump being so much against this and really pushing against that, what they were saying on CBS this morning on Monday is that Trump might actually alienate some of his Republican voters. So again, is it going to advantage or disadvantage a particular party? That is one of the arguments that we have here. It's not trivial. There have been a number of state studies about voting in general, and some studies have shown things like name placement, the amount of days for early voting. Those types of things can tilt an election one way or the other. In an election where there's a large margin, it doesn't matter. But again, if there's going to be a very close election, as I expect this year, that could be very significant. So the other way of looking about this, rather than does it disadvantage or an advantage one party, is to look at it as voting is the right of every citizen of the USA. And there's 2 parts to it. One is to actually vote. And the second part of it that's just as critical is that your vote is counted. So when you're creating a system that works to ensure that every citizen gets to vote and their vote will be counted, that's a different way of looking at it than should we permit it because it advantages or disadvantages one of the parties. So the goal should be, I believe, and actually it wasn't even me, it was somebody else, the goal should be to avoid letting the rules dictate who wins based on whose voters can participate. That's the first one, right? That's, are we making the decision based on which party is going to be advantaged? So you have the URL, I didn't put it in here. So do states have experience with mail-in voting? Did I miss a poll? I didn't know. And we do have a number of states that have experience with mail-in voting. I did not have these dates right in front of me when I wrote your handout. So if you want to plug those dates in, you can plug those in. Otherwise, they will be in the next handout I give you. But Washington, Oregon, and Colorado, as you can see, have been doing mail-in ballots for some time. Utah and Hawaii are relatively new to this, but still they have some experience with that. And according to the article with the URL that's given in your handout there, all of these states have experienced very little fraud. So back to that question about how secure is mail-in balloting, certainly on the face of it, it looks like it's pretty secure. 4 states, California, Colorado, Oregon, Washington, I still didn't find the date for California, but I'll get that. They all hold elections by mail only. So here again, if we've been doing that since '98 in Oregon, and we don't have any big instances of fraud, I'm thinking it's got to be fairly safe. So problems, yes. There certainly are some problems as I was reading through all sorts of literature that I've uncovered and that I'm concerned about. Certainly getting and returning the ballots is a potential issue. Printers have to print the ballots in a timely fashion and be able to get them to the precincts or to the state to be mailed out. State by state things vary as to how that's done. But that's a potential issue if we have, and we are seeing big increases in the amount of mail-in ballots. So being able to get them, I've not heard of in Michigan, anybody who's had a problem with getting their ballots from the printers in a timely fashion and mail them out, but that could be come November.
Charlie, can I stop you for just 1 second? Because we did have a question that kind of fits right here.
Sure.
And it was about, what do you do if you go to drop your ballot off and City Hall or your polling, wherever you're supposed to, the clerk's office, drop them off, is closed and not open in time?
Well, in fact, actually, I may pull Stacy in on this one. By the way, Stacy Lower Porter is our clerk for Lincoln Township. So she and I have talked about this many years ago and now again. But I know in Lincoln Township, we have a drop box that's there. So whether the township's open or not, you just stick it in the slot in the box. Stacy, do you have any other comments?
Yeah, most places now have drop boxes, and the state actually used CARE funds this year to encourage all jurisdictions to get a secure drop box. So you could buy one through a mass purchase through the state, or they gave you a credit to use towards it to encourage availability to all voters to be able to drop their ballot off.
Good, thanks, Stacy.
Thanks, Stacy.
The people I've talked to in Michigan, I've talked to a couple of the other people too, and I think we do a really good job of trying to make sure everybody's vote is counted, and that's really critical. So the other one is mailing votes in a timely fashion. In Wisconsin, just this past year, 9,000 absentee ballot votes were never sent to the voters who requested them for the primary. So there are some issues that potentially can crop up with this thing, and we've now got some experiences with that. That's a horrible thing to have happen again. If your belief is, as a U.S. citizen, everybody has a right to vote and their vote should be counted, this is tragic when this happens. That's one state. Imagine that happening in several. So I'm concerned about that type of thing. There was also 3 tubs of absentee ballots that never reached voters that were discovered at a postal center outside of Milwaukee. So there are some concerns there. Returning by mail, again, and you guys were all really good on this thing when I asked that polling question. you have to have enough time in order to get that ballot there. That's why I was so adamant in that handout I send to you. If you're sitting there holding that ballot right now, please don't mail that in. Take that and drop it off to your municipality. That's the best way to ensure it'll be there so that it's counted on time. So there have been some studies. In fact, CBS this morning, just on the 27th, just a week or two ago, did a special on test of the Postal Service and doing mail to the Postal Service. I gave you the URL in your handout, but they found that some ballots were lost in the post office. They really had to press the post office to get them to release the ballots. They found that 3% of the ballots never arrived to the post office. 4 days after the mailing, only 21% of the ballots had not arrived to the post office yet. So we're looking at more than 80%, or less than 80% of the ballots got there in 4 days. So again, getting them there on time is an issue that we need to be concerned with. I think as a consequence of all this, and I know that a number of the states are really talking about what can they do. We're seeing these problems and we're trying to fix them. So they're there. Rejected ballots, and here's probably the biggest one of the things that just hit me hardest. Rejected ballots, much higher percentage of rejected ballots. I've read a number of different cases and a number of different studies. One of our states just this spring and summer, 10% of the mail-in ballots did not get there on time. So 10% of those people who voted by mail, their votes never got counted. So there again, we have some issues. There's a URL in your handout. Ballots, especially from the younger people, the 18 to 20-year-old age group, people of color, first-time voters. Basically, some studies, people have really looked into it, and those seem to be the groups that tend to have their ballots rejected. They've got some speculations as to why, and I think if you take a look at that URL, you'll find out about that too. Sometimes they're just for simple errors. Sometimes there are serious reasons. One of the things too is there's just a surprisingly sparse amount of research about this, why our ballots rejected. So we need to do a better job, I think, on that. And I think there is more emphasis being placed on that. So the big reason, couple big reasons why they're rejected. One certainly is they don't get there on time. The other is the signatures. So either the signature is not on the ballot or on the envelope with the ballot, and different states do this a little differently. So here we have to sign the outside of a folder that the ballot goes into. Other states have multiple places you've got to sign them. So the signatures becomes an issue as well. In Michigan, note about Michigan, and again, this is a conversation that Stacy enlightened me about. In Michigan, I think there are probably only about 3 reasons that the ballots would be rejected. They're not in on time, and there's nothing that can be done. If your ballot does not get in on time, it's not going to be counted. The other big reason that Stacy and I talked about is missing signatures and marking them in pencil. So the cool thing that I didn't know till I talked to Stacy is that Michigan clerks and throughout the entire state, they are encouraged a lot to try and remedy these problems that they've got. So she said that every effort is made to contact that person if they didn't sign that ballot, to get that signature on there so it's a valid ballot. And they can actually create a duplicate ballot. If somebody marks their ballot in pencil, you're not supposed to do that. It has to be in ink. But if somebody does that, they have a process set up. And Martin, you're going to find out, I think, about that in your training tomorrow. But there's a big process set up for how we can correct that ballot and make sure that ballot's converted to ink in a way that's acceptable to everybody and fair, and then that ballot will be counted. So again, I think Michigan, I'm certainly seeing some cool stuff in Michigan on that. Counting and reporting in a timely fashion. Here's another issue that we've got. Like I said, do we have enough counters? Is there a secure and large enough place to count the ballots? Is there a good way to secure the ballots from the time they are mailed in to the time they are counted, and then for a long period of time after that, the clerk's offices have to keep those ballots securely in case there's a recall to deal with those. So I'm talking about counting them and reporting them and securing them for that entire period of time. So I think it's time for enough talk from me. We need to have a couple more poll questions. Amy, how about number 4, and then we'll do number 5.
Sure. Number 4, how likely is it that many ballots could be lost by the U.S. Postal Service or precincts? 1, not at all. 2 and 3, 4 or 5, it will happen. So how likely is it that many ballots will be lost? I think we've got 1 more to vote.
Oh, good. We got 1 not at all.
Yeah, we have 1 not at all. I'm really hoping that's Stacy. But all right, here we go. I'm going to end the polling on this, and we are going to say 1 not at all. 2, ooh, 2s. People think it's pretty good. 4s, there's some 5s. You got a mixture on this one, Charlie.
Yeah, I got 50% of that group saying 4 or 5 that it will happen. And that, unfortunately, at this point, based on what I've read and seen, that certainly has been the case. Based on what I've read and seen, I think a lot of people are really onto this, a lot of the clerks, a lot of the states, and they're saying, hey, we got to do something about it. So I'm being more optimistic than saying, yeah, the past history is probably a 4 or 5, but I think going forward, I'm thinking that there's enough discussion of this that we're going to get it in check. So let's try this next one too. It's a fun one.
All right. Number 5. How likely is it that many ballots could be hidden or stolen? 1, not at all. 3 is neutral. 5 is it will happen. So how likely is it that many ballots could be hidden or stolen? All righty, 2 more seconds, and you got them all over the map. But yeah, people are pretty optimistic about this.
Yeah, but 40, well, I don't know, 40%. You got 10 votes in there, and 4 of them are 4 or 5. So 60%. Not unlikely, but 40% likely. Nobody neutral on this one. So that's an interesting one. I don't know. I really don't know. Certainly, I could conjure up in my mind ways that might happen, but I don't know. I hope that won't be happening. I think, and Stacy, I think she and I talked a little bit about this, but they're pretty secure, at least here in our township. They keep those under lock and key. They've got a special place where they keep them away. But as you look across the country, I don't know, maybe some places don't do as good a job on that as we do. But I certainly know from a couple of people that I've talked to in our elections group, I think we're doing a good job. Okay, so let's move on. So fraud is a big thing. And folks, I got to tell you, I've been reading a lot about this fraud stuff, and so far there is like very little fraud. And right there, 5 states, this is one of the articles. I think there's a URL, I didn't put it on here, but I think there's a URL in your handout that deals with this. And they said the 5 states that have been doing this for a long time, very, very little fraud that has actually been found. Michigan recently, and I got to go back and get these dates, but we just had a law introduced. In fact, I think it passed, that you can't vote, actually making it fraud, being very specific and upfront, that if you vote in more than 1 precinct, that's fraud. You can go to jail for that. And then the other thing that happened is that there was a court case, I think it was last week, that was decided that said that the ballots must be returned by 8 o'clock on election day. So there's been a lot of discussion across the country, and several court challenges that I've read, challenging the fact does the ballot have to be received? Can it be postmarked? Can it be delivered by? All those are different things. So different states do it different ways. Some states, if it is postmarked, just like our taxes, if it's postmarked by that date, it's okay. It may arrive 2 or 3 days after that, but as long as it's postmarked for that date, it's acceptable. Be clear, folks, in the state of Michigan, that's not acceptable. That court case last week or the week before said they have to actually be in the clerk's office by 8 p.m. election day. So that's the way we do it here. And it's good that we get these things clarified, I think. There are other issues: ballot tampering, losing ballots, votes in multiple precincts, ballot stuffing, impersonating somebody else. So as we've seen in these polls, a little bit divided as people have come up on this thing. Not everybody's as sure that there won't be problems with it. And I think there's some, certainly recent history, this year's history gives us reason to pause. And I think there have been enough pausing going on. So as far as mail-in ballots, as far as technical and non-technical, probably the biggest technical issue here, we don't have internet connections. We don't have computer connections. We're dealing with paper ballots. So the biggest thing is securing those paper ballots, being sure they're in fireproof, waterproof vaults in case there is some sort of disaster issue, getting those printed. There are a number of different ways that states deal with the security of those things to make sure that they're not tampered with and people don't create phony ones. A common one is to use barcodes, and sometimes multiple barcodes, but there are other ways that people do that that are being employed technically, and it varies from state to state, and they're all doing some sort of way of doing that. A lot of it is the non-technical issues and the preparing of the counters and the handling of the ballots, and Stacy did share their big document on how they get prepared. Martin will probably cue me when he goes and does his training tomorrow, but there's some pretty extensive training going on for these people, and I think that is what gives me a good, comfortable feeling that we're doing a good job when I see this type of stuff. So mail-in ballots, again, Washington, I plugged in some dates that were not there. These are states that have been doing it for some time and have reported very little problems with that. And there are some states that we have now: California, Colorado, Oregon, and Washington.
Oops, did we just lose them? Well, we just lost Charlie's.
Mail-in. All their voting is it? Yes. Yes.
Charlie,
Yes.
we just lost you there for a second, so you might want to repeat that last sentence you had. Something happened there in your video, in your audio.
I got a message, my internet connection's unstable. So my last thing that I was saying is that we have a number of states have been doing mail-only voting. California, Colorado, Oregon, and Washington. So we do have some experience with this, and it has gone well. Did you get it all now?
We got it all now, thanks.
All right, so let's take a little bit of a history lesson here. 2/3 of the states, any qualified voter may vote absentee, no excuse. 1/3, you've got to have some sort of an excuse. Michigan, we have a system where we have what's called a permanent absent voter list that you can join. Other states do that as well. In some states, they're now toying with and starting automatically mailing ballots to every eligible voter. So how long has this been going on? Well, actually, the research I did shows this goes back to the Civil War. And what's interesting, we seem to have now the Republican Party being opposed to the mail-in ballots, but the Civil War, it was the Democratic Party that was opposed to mail-in ballots. So yin and yang is cool. We get both sides of the story, but the bottom line is it's been going on for a long time. About 150,000 of the 1 million Union soldiers were able to vote absentee in the 1864 presidential election. That was our really first widespread use of non-in-person voting. That's back in the Civil War. Been going on for a long time. The military really seems to have taken a lead on this. One of the first known instances of any kind of mail-in voting was in 1775. So again, and there's a book this guy wrote, I gave you the URL, it's a humongously long 5-line URL or something like that, so I did not. World War II, every state let soldiers vote remotely, and the military was responsible for about 3.2 million absentee voters. About 7% of the total vote in 1944 came by absentee ballot or mail-in ballot. There's no proven instance of widespread fraud among soldiers of the Civil War or any later war with voting. So again, can this be done? I believe it certainly can. Can it be done safely? I think there's a lot of evidence that says it can. What do we need to do to ensure this? One of the articles that I read, this is the Atlantic, put a lot of research into this stuff, and they said that they gave us some recommendations how to prevent vote by mail from inadvertently disenfranchising voters, and said that there are 4 key provisions that the states need to do as safeguards. Postage must be free or prepaid by the government. Ballots postmarked on or before Election Day must count. Signature matching laws need to be reformed to protect voters. Community organizations must be permitted to help collect, deliver, and seal ballots. That's the Atlantic's recommendation. Specific steps that they put in: first, states must guarantee an adequate staffing at polls by turning to staff at state agencies and to students to staff polls. States should expand curbside voting. States must expand early voting, including weekend voting. States must adopt vote anywhere rules. So in most states, you have to go to your precinct in order to do the voting. What the Atlantic is saying, and they're not the only ones, there are a number of people who are saying that we should move to vote anywhere. I think it's Indiana or Ohio has actually moved to that. It doesn't make any difference which precinct you're in. You can go to any precinct and you can do the voting there. Finally, states should develop systems that allow voters to sign up to reserve time to vote during off-peak hours as well. So that's their recommendations. That's one proposal. There was another proposal I was reading on this. Certainly, if you know of other proposals, people I'd like, and recommendations, I would certainly like to hear about those, and we'll include that in any follow-up on this as well, and even perhaps in part 2 as well. There are a lot of ideas. There are tons of ideas that are going on. In conclusion, what did you get?
There's a question.
Oops, we have a question?
Were
Amy,
those Atlantic Magazine's recommendations?
Yeah, that's specifically from the Atlantic magazine, and that is I believe that URL is in your handout. So if you want to go and read it, I just took the highlights out of that. So again, one person, one organization's idea. There are a couple others that I read that had suggestions and ideas, and I just didn't get a chance to put them all in here. So, and I'm sure I have not heard of all of them. That's why I'm asking if you know of some, let us know. So in conclusion, after doing all this work and spending all this time, absentee voter or mail-in voter has very little instance of fraud. And the reminder there too is the first step in this process is essentially being vetted that you are a valid voter, and that is by being registered to vote. If you're not registered to vote, you cannot do a mail-in ballot, you can't do an in-person ballot. So that's the first step. So that's kind of a vetting process that starts this whole thing. I think also certainly mail-in voting is a very valid way to ensure that everybody gets to vote in the US, and especially when we look at what's going on now with our COVID-19 issues, that I think becomes really important. So I boiled it down to 3 big issues. Absent voter, mail-in voting has increased the number of rejected ballots. That's not a good thing. The amount of fraud in voting is probably not well known, as I've read all this stuff, and I'll talk to you about that in a minute, a little bit more. The time to complete vote counting will increase. We're not going to get our vote tallies done as quickly as we had in the past, and I think we can live with that. I don't think it's a big deal if I don't know within 24 hours who won that election. 3 issues. So absent voter has increased the number of rejected ballots. Like I said, this is a big problem. A lot of it is not being signed. Some of it is doing it in pencil, or some other states have a lot of different rules that are there. All states can improve here, but only if we're committed to all US citizens cast a vote and all votes are counted. But I think that one is something that we can decrease those rejected ballot counts, and I think a number of states are really working to do that. The amount of fraud in voting is probably well known. This is one of the things that I've sort of concluded. How do you determine if fraud has gone on? So it's a tough thing to determine. If somebody, how do I know if my neighbor didn't vote, how do I know somebody else didn't vote for them, so to speak, and send in a ballot for them? And how would an election official know that? That's a very difficult thing to know. Probably what I finally realized, the best way to know that is if everybody votes, right? Because if my neighbor goes to vote and they say, oh no, you've already voted, that's the way we're going to find out there's fraud going on. So by everybody voting, it's also going to help us know if there is fraud going on or not as well. So the deceased voters, a little bit more difficult on that. Figure out if deceased voters have voted. They won't come to vote another time and find out somebody voted in their name, but that's a tougher one to crack. I think with the increased emphasis on fraud in voting, I think we might see some more information about this, and we might find out there's a little bit more, but I don't think it's going to be a significant amount.
And I did have a couple of comments, Charlie.
Sure.
Number one is in Michigan, if you're a non-registered voter, you can register on the day of the election.
That's correct.
Yep. And the second comment was your local clerk is also able to access your voting history. Not not how you voted, but just if you voted. So you can see if any, you know you were gone and you didn't absentee, someone voted for you, there was fraud.
That's right. That's right. But they're not going and looking. And Stacy, if you want to chime in on this.
Stacy just dropped out. She's coming back in. Give her a second.
Okay. Because I believe they're not going to go through and look at all the voters. So Stacy, we have a question comment for you. I don't think you're looking at, you guys aren't going through and looking at all the voter history to make sure that somebody hasn't voted twice, are you?
The state, actually, we upload the state, when the election's done, we upload the voting history, and the state has a database and a security team that goes through, and they match, they look for any doubles in names, driver's license numbers, addresses. So they do actually take all the voting history and they plug it into their database, and it looks for any irregularities or any possible double voting, and then they'll proceed investigating if necessary.
Oh, good. Yeah. So actually, we've got it, at least in Michigan, we've got it pretty well covered. Time to complete the vote counting. Like I say, that's going to increase, and I just got to say, from my own perspective, I don't mind if it takes a couple of days later, even a couple of weeks, in order to get it right. I'm fine with that. But I think we may have to do that. So also, it's not without concerns, the increase in rejected ballots over in-person voting. The biggest reason for rejection is not being received. And that's a kind of a human error. So we just need to work on getting the vote and letting people know those timelines. I think also I put a little chart in your handout that says what date you have to be registered by, what date the ballot has to be returned by, and that stuff in your handout. That Michigan Secretary of State, SOS website, gives you all that information as well. I did get the other day a notice from the Secretary of State reminding me that the election is coming up. So I guess they're starting to do that, and that's a good thing too, to have that happening.
We do have a question for Stacy, though. Can I throw that out there? Since I know she's here before we lose her again. For states that allow ballots to just be postmarked by Election Day and not received by Election Day, how would precincts know if somebody had mailed it in? If somebody tries to vote in person, would they know? How would they know?
That I'm not real sure of. I do know, so our system will show us. So if you get an absentee ballot and we mail it to you, but say you never bring it back to us and you go to the polls on Election Day, the workers know, the computer system, the database says, John Doe received an absentee ballot from the jurisdiction, but it hasn't been returned. So then what those workers do is they call our office and they say, hey, I have John Doe here. He says he never got his absentee ballot and he wants to vote in person. So then what happens is they have to sign an affidavit that says that they attest to the fact that they have not voted their ballot, their absentee ballot, and that they're choosing to vote in person, and then they're allowed to vote in person. So if they were to, say, turn around and go try to drop that off after they voted in person, that would be voter fraud on their part because they've sworn to an affidavit that they're not going to do that. So the state then would contact your prosecuting attorney and process it from there.
Awesome.
I'm guessing other states have that same record as well. They would know that somebody was sent one and would do their double check.
It's in that, if you look at that handout, you see the dates. That the ballot was mailed from the municipality, the date that the application was in. So that information's all in the database there. So if they tried to go and vote in person, that stuff is there. It's available that they've had a ballot mailed to them. Okay, so thanks, Stacy. Fraud expected, again, we'll learn more about fraud, but I still think overall the fraud, and certainly hearing what Stacy has to say about the database and the way they're using that, I think the incidence is going to be very low, no matter what going forward. And we're just going to need more time to do that. Okay, so yeah, so I already talked about that a little bit. And in part two, I want to talk more a little bit about the electronics. So the database is a potential issue. How do we get all the information rolled up and turned over fast? That's more of an issue, but we'll talk about that in part two. So basically, I think we're kind of wrapping up here. We're going a little bit late, but from next week, I'll do the how to spot COVID-19 scams. And then about 3 weeks away, we'll do part two to this from 1:30 to 2:30. I really would like some input on that. So if you go back to that part two, page 3, I think it's on page 4 of your handout, and look at some of the stuff that I put in there. And then also on page 11 of your handout, these are some of the other topics. I'll tell you, I really want to focus, what I'm thinking about focusing on for part 2 is the fake news, disinformation, social media, a little bit more information on this fraud issue, and a number of the issues back there on disinformation and interference. But I would like to hear from you folks if that's what you really want to hear about, or if there are some of these other things that you're interested in. So please email me. My email address is all over that document, including at the bottom and the footer. Send me emails on it. So thanks, folks. Any more questions?
Feel free to type them in the chat box. And if anyone has a specific AV ballot question on the process and how we handle it, please feel free to contact our sweet Stacy. Thank you. And her email is in the chat box.
Oh, thanks, Stacy.
No, we didn't really mean to put you to work, Stacy, but
I asked her if I could before.
That's great. Thank you. And I really hope you guys come back to part 2, because I think it will be very important. You can find it, the link to Eventbrite to sign up just like you did this time is in Eventbrite, as well as all over our Facebook, Campus for Creative Aging. It's on our Twitter. You'll probably see this session appear on Twitter in the next week or so, and Facebook, so you can share it with your friends and family, because I think it's really pertinent, good information that needs to be out there right now. So Marty says that if you're in St. Joe and you come in and the voter database shows that you've had an absentee ballot, you need to provide them that absentee ballot so they can spoil it, I'm assuming, because otherwise you're not going to get to vote. And that's what, I live in Van Buren County, and I happen to have our clerk be a speaker at one of our
Martin's one of our
events.
poll workers also, incidentally.
Yeah, exactly.
Cool.
All right. So I don't
Good.
think there's any questions in here. I think we're pretty good. Do you want to give our last poll?
Oh yeah, that's right. I do want
Okay.
that last poll. I almost forgot about that. Thank you.
So this is our last poll.
I don't have.
And it's regarding the handouts. I sent it to you this morning. You may not have had a chance to look at them, but the handouts that Charlie is referencing. And we want to know, did you actually not look at it, skimmed it, read parts of it, read most of it? Only, you know what I didn't put in there was fed it, let the dog play with it. We could have had.
Oh, I didn't even
ones.
think of that. I didn't think of that beforehand.
All right. So we've got, all right.
Oh yeah, I think we got, it should be
I
it.
think we have every end of the spectrum. So, all right, I'm going to end the polling.
Just to join in, Jack had a question. Just waiting
Sure.
to stand a minute ago.
Oh, okay,
Yeah,
Jack.
thank you. I'm Jack Mcfadden. I'm in Nashville, Tennessee, actually.
Oh,
Although I
thank
do have a cousin. I do have a cousin in Michigan who's a member of the League of Women Voters there. I'm a member of the League of Women Voters of Tennessee, and I wanted to know if I'll have your permission to share the handout at least.
Absolutely.
The local folks
Absolutely.
here, because we do regular educational sessions, and I think some of the content here is really interesting.
Sure, Jack. Yeah, you can typically I have an email list of people that I email. This Wendy can attest to that, and I always say in there, please pass on my handouts. My goal is to educate people, and if you do have other questions, I mean, with Zoom that we've got nowadays, if you want me to do something for you guys, let me know.
I appreciate that. I will pass that on.
Yeah, thanks for joining us. Like I said, we have people from all over. And you can feel free to share the whole video. It'll take a day or so to get it out there. I've got to run it through marketing, but you can feel free to share that too. So.
Yep. Great. Thanks for attending. I hope it was beneficial to all of you. Thanks, Stacy. Appreciate your comments.
Yes, definitely. Thanks, Stacy. Thanks, Charlie. We will see you next time.
All righty.
Bye.
Bye.